You think you know Venice. Canals, masks, romance, gondolas threading through water beneath arched bridges. The city Shakespeare used when he needed a backdrop for love and intrigue. But there's something in the historical records that doesn't fit that image. For more than 1,000 years, Venice called itself La Serenissima, the Most Serene Republic. Yet in the archives, you find letters where Venetians won't name certain officials in writing. You find trial records with no defendant present. You find executions with no public announcement. Once you understand what ruled Venice, you'll never mistake serenity for peace again. Venice was not ruled the way it appeared to be ruled. The Doge, the elected leader, the public face of Venetian power, stood in ceremonial robes at state functions, blessed ships, received ambassadors. He appeared in paintings. His name went on decrees. But the Doge could not act alone. He could not declare war. He could not sign treaties. He could not even leave the palace without permission. Real power in Venice did not rest with one man. It rested with councils, layers of them. The Great Council, which contained the nobility. The Senate, which managed diplomacy and war. And above them all, smaller and more permanent than the rest, the Council of Ten. The Council of Ten was created in 1310 as an emergency measure. Venice had just survived a conspiracy, an attempted coup by members of its own nobility. The city needed a body that could act quickly, quietly, and decisively to protect the Republic from internal threats. So they created the Ten, a temporary solution. It never disbanded. By the 15th century, the Council of Ten had become the most powerful institution in Venice. It answered to no one, not the Doge, not the Senate, not even the Great Council that had created it. It operated in secrecy. Its meetings were closed. Its deliberations were not recorded in detail. Even its membership was not always public knowledge. Venetians did not elect the Ten. The Great Council chose them. But once chosen, the Ten controlled who could accuse, who could be tried, and what information reached the public. Venice didn't abolish democracy. It simply made sure the most important decisions never reached a vote. Who sat on the Council of Ten? Officially, it consisted of 10 elected members from the Venetian nobility, plus the Doge and his 6 councillors, 17 men in total. They served for 1 year, though in practice many were re-elected or moved between powerful councils, ensuring continuity. But you wouldn't know their names from walking the streets. In other Italian city-states, powerful men built palaces with their family crests visible from the street. They commissioned paintings, they erected statues. They made sure you knew who held power. Not in Venice. The Council of Ten did not advertise itself. Members were forbidden from discussing the council's deliberations outside its chambers. Revealing state secrets, even to family, was treason. The punishment was exile, imprisonment, or death. In letters that survive from the 16th and 17th centuries, Venetian merchants and minor nobility refer to the Ten only obliquely. Those who decide such matters, the responsible authorities. Even in private correspondence, they avoided naming the council directly, because in Venice, you could not be certain who was reading your mail. The city employed informants, many of them. Some were professionals, spies embedded in foreign courts or rival cities. But many were ordinary Venetians, servants, clerks, gondoliers, people whose survival depended on selling information to those who could use it. And the Council of Ten was always buying. Walk through Venice today and you might notice them. Stone carvings of lion heads set into walls, mouths open as if mid-roar. They look decorative, Venetian pride perhaps, the lion of St. Mark, symbol of the Republic. But these weren't decorations. These were Bocche di Leone, the mouths of the lion, denunciation boxes. Anyone could slip a written accusation into the lion's mouth, and it would fall directly into the hands of the Council of 10. You didn't need evidence. You didn't need to sign your name. You could accuse your neighbor of treason, of immoral conduct, of conspiracy, and the accusation would be investigated, anonymously. The rules, on paper, were strict. Accusations had to be signed to be acted upon. Unsigned denunciations were supposed to be ignored. But unsigned accusations were still read, and even if they couldn't be used in a trial, they could be filed, remembered, cross-referenced with other reports. In a city where the same families held power for generations, memory was a tool. People knew the boxes existed. They knew accusations were being made. They did not know who was making them, or what was being said about them, or whether their own name had appeared in a denunciation that week. The threat was ambient, not loud, not violent, just always there, like the water surrounding the city. If the Council of 10 decided you were a threat, you would be arrested, quietly, often at night. You would not be told the charges immediately. You would not see the evidence against you. You would not know who had accused you or what they had claimed. Venetian justice, at least in cases handled by the 10, did not resemble a public trial. There was no jury of your peers. There was no opportunity for your family to speak on your behalf. The 10 heard the case themselves in a closed chamber and decided your fate. Sometimes they questioned you, sometimes they did not. In 1540, a minor nobleman named Francesco Molin was arrested on suspicion of revealing state secrets. He had spoken, it was alleged, to a foreign diplomat about Venice's naval plans. The evidence came from an unsigned denunciation and the testimony of a single servant. Molin was held in the Pozzi, the wells, a series of cells below the Doge's palace, built at water level where dampness seeped through the stone. He was questioned twice. Both times he denied the charges. He asked to see the accusation. The request was denied. The Council of 10 found him guilty. He was sentenced to exile. His property was confiscated. He never learned who had accused him or what specific words had been reported. He died in exile 2 years later, in a boarding house on the Dalmatian coast, still writing letters to the Venetian Senate asking to return home. Venice did not need spectacle. It needed certainty that the system could reach you, anywhere, without explanation. There is a bridge in Venice that tourists photograph constantly, the Bridge of Sighs, built in 1600, connecting the Doge's palace to the prison. Enclosed with small windows of white limestone. Romantic, melancholic. The name suggests lovers parting, a last glimpse of Venice before departure. But the bridge was built for prisoners. It connected the interrogation rooms on the palace's second floor to the Prigioni Nuove, the new prisons, on the other side of the canal. Men crossed that bridge after sentencing, often on their way to cells where they would spend years, or the rest of their lives. The sigh wasn't romantic. It was the sound of someone seeing the lagoon for the last time before descending into stone. Below the palace, in the older cells, conditions were worse. The pozzi, the wells, were barely 5 feet high, carved into the foundation, so close to the waterline that at high tide, prisoners stood in cold seawater up to their ankles. Dampness rotted wood. Mold grew on the walls. In summer, the stone cells became ovens. In winter, men shivered without blankets. And yet Venice's prisons were not large. The city didn't need them to be. Because exile was more efficient than imprisonment. And exile didn't require Venice to feed you, or guard you, or remember you. You simply disappeared from the city's records. Your house was reassigned, your business dissolved, your name stopped appearing in guild ledgers. Venice erased you with paperwork. While the Council of Ten operated in secret, Venice built in public. St. Mark's Basilica, covered in gold mosaics brought from Constantinople. The Doge's Palace, with its lace-like Gothic facade facing the water. The Rialto, the Grand Canal, the piazzas filled with merchants selling silk from the East and spices from Africa and India. Venice was not trying to hide its power. It was trying to make power look like art. Festivals were frequent. Carnevale, the city-wide celebration before Lent, where everyone wore masks and class distinctions temporarily blurred. The Sposalizio del Mare, the marriage of the sea, where the Doge sailed out into the Adriatic and dropped a golden ring into the water, symbolizing Venice's dominion over the waves. These weren't just traditions, they were performances, demonstrations that Venice was orderly, prosperous, blessed by God and commerce. And they worked. Visitors from across Europe marveled at Venice's stability, while Florence tore itself apart with factional violence, while Rome endured corruption and coups, Venice remained serene. Its government functioned, its economy thrived. Its ships controlled trade routes from the Levant to the Atlantic. What those visitors didn't see were the closed trials, the exile orders, the letters intercepted and read before delivery, the denunciations slipped into stone mouths. Venice didn't hide power behind walls. It hid power behind beauty. Masks were central to Venetian life, especially during Carnevale. Nobles and commoners alike wore the bauta, a white mask that covered the face, paired with a black cloak and tricorn hat. It concealed identity. It erased class. For a few weeks each year, you could walk through Venice and not know if the person beside you was a merchant, a senator, or a servant. This was celebrated as freedom, the ability to move through the city unrecognized, to speak without consequence, to gamble, flirt, attend operas, or drink in taverns without your family name attached. But masks also normalized something else: anonymity. In a city where denunciations were anonymous, where trials happened behind closed doors, where informants moved unseen through crowds, masks were not just festive. They were a reflection of the system. Venice made secrecy feel like culture. If everyone wore masks during Carnevale, it didn't feel strange that the government operated behind closed doors. If anonymity was celebrated in the streets, it didn't feel oppressive when it appeared in the halls of power. The mask wasn't a disguise, it was a reminder. In Venice, you never knew who was watching. The Council of Ten had no oversight. The Great Council, which technically created the Ten, had more than 1,000 members by the 16th century. Too large to act quickly, too fractured to coordinate resistance, and many of its members owed their status to the stability the Ten provided. The Doge, the symbolic head of the Republic, could not overrule them. In fact, the Ten could arrest the Doge. And they did. In 1355, Doge Marino Faliero was accused of conspiracy, of plotting to overthrow the very council structure that limited his power. The Council of Ten tried him in secret, found him guilty, and beheaded him on the palace stairs. His portrait was removed from the hall of the Great Council. In its place, a black veil was painted on the wall, a reminder, even the Doge was not above the Ten. Foreign powers couldn't intervene. Venice was geographically isolated, protected by the lagoon. It controlled its own military. It had no rival city-state close enough to challenge it directly. And the Ten controlled foreign intelligence so thoroughly that even France, Spain, and the papacy struggled to know what was happening inside Venetian politics. So who could stop them? No one. Because the system wasn't built on fear of rebellion. It was built on the assumption that rebellion would never be organized in the first place. The 10 controlled information. They controlled justice. They controlled who could meet, who could speak, and who could be trusted. Resistance required coordination. Coordination required communication. Communication required trust. And in Venice, trust was a liability. Venice survived longer than almost any other republic in European history. From 697 to 1797, over 1,000 years. It outlasted empires, it endured the Black Death, the fall of Constantinople, wars with the Ottomans, and the shifting of trade routes to the Atlantic. And it did so without a single successful internal coup after 1310. The Council of Ten deserves much of the credit for that stability. It prevented conspiracies before they formed. It identified threats early. It acted decisively, without the need for public debate or approval. It was, by the standards of medieval and Renaissance Europe, remarkably effective. But effectiveness is not the same as freedom. By the 18th century, Venice had become rigid. Its economy stagnated. Its once dominant navy fell behind those of England, France, and Spain. Its government, so stable for so long, could not adapt. The very mechanisms that had preserved the Republic for centuries now paralyzed it. When Napoleon's army arrived in 1797, the Great Council voted to dissolve the Republic rather than fight. After more than a millennium, Venice surrendered without resistance. The Council of Ten had kept Venice safe from itself, but it had also made Venice incapable of change. Venice was not an authoritarian state in the way we usually imagine. There were no public executions to terrorize the population, no mass arrests, no soldiers patrolling the streets enforcing curfews. Instead, Venice perfected something quieter. It understood that power doesn't need to be loud to be absolute. It understood that people regulate themselves when they believe they are being watched, even if they aren't. It understood that uncertainty is more effective than cruelty, because uncertainty never ends. The Council of Ten didn't need to arrest everyone. They only needed to arrest enough people to remind the city that it could happen. They didn't need to read every letter. They only needed Venetians to believe that letters could be read. They didn't need informants everywhere. They only needed the possibility of informants. And so, Venetians watched what they said. They avoided political discussion. They informed on each other, sometimes to protect themselves, sometimes for petty revenge, sometimes because they believed it was their duty. The system ran on fear, but it was a soft fear, not the fear of soldiers or executioners, the fear of silence, of closed doors, of names whispered instead of spoken. You thought this was a story about gondolas and grandeur. It was always a story about control. Venice wasn't the only place to perfect this technique. Later, power would learn to do the same thing, but more efficiently. What Venice achieved with councils, surveillance, and architecture, others would learn to achieve with far less. Not through systems, not through informants, not even through beauty. Through symbols. Next on Lore&Ruin. She stands in a harbor, torch raised, welcoming the world. You've seen her in photographs, on postcards, in films. A symbol of freedom so iconic that questioning it feels almost unpatriotic. But the Statue of Liberty wasn't built for immigrants. And the chains at her feet? Most people have never seen them. Subscribe and you'll be there when it drops.